If Trump goes through with his plans, it would wipe out those elite who are behind Clintons and the Bidens. In other words, the Wall Streets, the hedge fund, the speculative financial interests, they would remain alive, although things happen, but they would lose their resources they previously had, which is what? The little machine that prints money that you and I don't have. But why Trump? And why do the elite see him in such a danger to their rules-based order? Because you see, America and the world in general, they need to be perceived not as a kind of united front, but as a, let's call it matryoshka, a nestling doll, hiding at least three Americas. So the first layer is the America of Wall Street, Washington's bureaucracy, Chicago, Hollywood, Silicon Valley. It's America's 1%. And then there's the second America, the post-industrial, or the corporate America. It stands for production and transnational companies born out of the second industrial revolution. And Trump became their voice. These are the deplorables, as Hillary Clinton called them. And that said, Trump would never have won the elections in 2016, and I don't think he has a chance to win it this year if the third America did not support him or does not support him. And this is the high-tech America, as you mentioned earlier. It's the America of knowledge, of brain workers, of new technology, of IT that has emerged over the past 40 years. And so on the global stage, Donald Trump has become a kind of a symbol and a mouthpiece for those forces that are not ready to sacrifice America for global schemes and will forgo them for the sake of America First ideology. And this vision represents a radical change in the balance of force in this global arena, and consequently, it represents a change of the direction in which mankind, not only the United States, but mankind is going. Because it's an issue of universal concern. And that's why the fight is not only between the Democrats and the Republicans, but all those who represent collective interests of nation states on the one hand, and this global parasitical financiers. And so we're witnessing actors in a process where the world is literally entering a new era. It's an era marked by this struggle for national liberation of societies separated by state boundaries and also customs against a common enemy, which is this all-destroying dominance of this global ruling class against the background of this looming social collapse as a result of what? Aggression of liberally minded global profiteers. And in that case, I repeat, the Trumps and the Xi Jinpings and the Putins and the Orbans and the Ficos, they stand on the same side, not because they're buddies. Okay, that's what the mainstream media wants you to believe. Fico is a stooge of Putin. Trump is a stooge of Putin because Putin has info on him that's, will benefit Putin against the United States. No, that's not the case. They represent a wing against which they need to band together because the other side is very powerful. It's the global financial liberal banking financiers. It's the Satanist wing. And so the idea in the United States right now is, as Trump wants to do, you save the United States at the expense of those global financial liberal banking financiers, or if they win, they will destroy the United States from within. And again, the Democrats, the Republicans, it's not a different thing. That's the same thing. Okay, they're all the same thing. Trump is different. Okay, but it doesn't matter if we're talking about the Bushes, we're talking about, it makes no difference, the Clintons, they all represent a global liberal banking financiers. The idea that they have is you destroy the United States to save their global liberal system. And people like the Rockefellers and company, they're not American for as much as they have the United States passport. They're globalists. And they're in the United States, they're in New York, because that's where the money is. I think that one of the key reasons why Trump won in 2016 is because of you. And I think that's one of the key reasons why you are deplatformed and hated so much by so many of these global liberal banking financiers, because you're the cause, quote unquote, okay, the culprit for, in great part, for having Donald Trump win the election.
Just interrupt, they say that and believe that. And when I've been in these law firm meetings with top Democrat Party lawyers, they shake with hatred. And I'm like, so yes, they actually believe I did that. I didn't. My show was a focal point for guests and callers and people to come together. And when they went to the RNC and a third of the people were wearing my shirts, yes, that's when they blamed me. And I'm credit's great. I don't care about it, but it's dangerous credit. I don't think it was me, but it was the show that was the catalyst, reaching 30, 40 million a day at that time, that did do it. I didn't mean to interrupt. Please continue.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's you're too kind. But the thing is, I mean, you played a key role in having and Trump himself I think on more than one occasion back in 2016, he even said it so himself.
He told me that in person. He told me that in person.
So the question again of the mid-1960s is still very current. What do? We have, this biblical crisis looming that will turn, this entire world to mush. You'll have revolutions, all kinds of stuff. So what do? Science and development for the 99% of the population? No. For the elite, yes. And that's where transhumanism comes in, CRISPR technologies, 5G, 6G, et cetera, et cetera. And again, progress is good for humanity and bad for the elite because it makes us, the people, richer. And the elite need to do the opposite. Pay attention. The first half of the 20th century, Alex, was a riot of inventions and discoveries. And then if you kind of look, what have we discovered in the second half of the 20th century? Cell phone, internet, personal computer. And all of these things are directly related to control over human beings. And then at the height of the 1960s, we have Tavistock Institute was given the task to kill a cultural optimism. And so the Western elite made a very simple decision. They began literally to stop scientific progress, technological progress, the elements that would improve the lives of people per square kilometer of space against nature. But to do this, it was necessary to justify why they're reducing progress. And then
and that was my question. I mean, sorry to interrupt, but that's my question. Why would they want to kill progress and kill the general public having wealth?
Because if we have wealth, we're stronger together. We don't need them anymore. They need us to be dependent on them. And the first report of the Club of Rome, as you know, proposed the concept of zero growth. But the only way you can take advantage of the zero growth is if the Soviet bloc also participated. And so the Soviet Union was invited to participate in these environmentalist projects as a Club of Rome. And so together they worked together. For those people who think that they're opposite ideologies, no, they worked together. Because for the Soviet Union to the West, the idea of progress was bad because then it would give people freedom that they didn't want them to have. And then look what happened in the 1960s and 1970s. The apex of capitalism and then systemic anti-capitalism, which was the Soviet Union, stagnation, technical stagnation, scientific stagnation, industrial progress. Each of these things, were reduced in its own way. But where the capitalist system had room to maneuver because it was more advanced, the Soviet system did not, and that's why it collapsed when it did. And so what we're seeing right now, but now, and I've talked about this before, you cannot have one system without the other. They need each other, and they're mutually inclusive. And so the Soviet Union collapsed. And again, I talked about this metaphorical train that came back in 1991 to a station called the Soviet Union. That train is coming today to the station that says the United States of America. And unfortunately, the result for the United States is going to be exactly the same as for the Soviet Union. Collapse, dismantling of the country. Once there was this country called the Soviet Union, made up of 15 republics. Now it's all of these different countries fighting each other. And so this year at the Bilderberg Conference, they're going to be talking about this. Because again, I want to remind you, back in 1991, many people in the West and also in the former Soviet Union thought that the demise of the Soviet Union was a blessing. You have this new era of planetary capitalism was beginning. In Fukuyama wrote back in 1992 his famous book, The End of History. So what he wanted to say was that this was an age of liberals was coming. It should have been clear to people who understood the political economy of capitalism that the destruction of the Soviet Union was the beginning of the end of the capitalist system, okay, when you're talking about systemically. It's just a question of how long it would take. And now we're seeing 30
exactly,
years
because
later,
when you get rid of the opposition to it, it's not because you've defeated it, it's because you've now prepared the West to merge with that, which was the Carnegie plan since the 20s.
Since the 20s, exactly. So the elite decided that it was necessary to create two centers that could face each other, okay, as they're fighting, like wrestling, for example. And so they needed time to carry out their plan. And the plan was, what do we do now? And the plan was 16 years, 8 years Barack Obama, 8 years Hillary Clinton, okay? But again, but Clinton lost. And in the 16 years, the plan was they would solve the problem of the end of the economic model and the end of infinite expansion, which cannot exist, obviously, on a finite planet. And the answer to the problem was really simple. It was brilliant from the perspective of the ruling elite. The creation of, on the one hand, trans-Pacific community and transatlantic community. And these two communities, as the Soviet Union and the United States, they would fight each other, but because both groups were represented by the same group of people behind them at a supranational level, it was a brilliant idea. But Their plan failed. Why? Because Trump won in 2016 in great part thanks to Alex Jones.
All right, I'm very excited about this hour's interview, and the only problem is we should have tried to book him for 2 hours, but hopefully he'll come back again soon. It's been a few years since he was on. That's too long. He'll come back on next month. We'll have him for 2 hours. He is a worldwide bestseller in languages all over the world, and he has lived all over the world. And I remember interviewing him 20 years ago. I remember going to Bilderberg events and covering it with him, and him explaining they're taking over society, AI takeover, they're going to take over the human body, and he was just hammering it. And I knew that was their plan, but I didn't know 10% of what Daniel Estulin did on that central subject. He's a huge part of my film, In-Game Blueprint for Global Enslavement. You can find all his books and more at Estulin VZ on X. Estulin is ESTULIN, Estulin, and then capital VZ on X. And he joins us now to talk about the incredible developments in our world. He can go wherever he wants. I'm not the old Alex that I constantly interrupt, but I'm sure I'll have some points I want to raise. But all I will say up front, because I want to know his view on this, we are seeing record numbers other than what we saw right before they released COVID 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. Record numbers, thousands of prominent CEOs, heads of major banks exiting or announcing their exits. We have Klaus Schwab, we know, being removed. They wanted to remove him in Davos this year, but he refused and said, I'll be here at 100. Well, he's gone now. We are seeing massive movements. We have Melinda Gates leaving the foundation last week. I mean, I tried to cover it yesterday. We covered at least 50 major globalists leaving yesterday with Dr. Kirk Elliott. So I'm going to ask him that up front, and then where he thinks the world is today, and then to go into any direction he wants, because he's got so much knowledge. Daniel, I wish that you weren't so right, but man, you have been just dead on. They say Alex Jones is next decade's news today. Well, you have certainly, in many levels, surpassed that. So I'm just giving credit where it's due. You're one of our best brains that's pro-human out there, so thank you for all you do.
Alex, thanks so much for having me. You and I have been friends for, the first time you interviewed me was back in, if I'm not mistaken, in 2007 when my book on the Bilderbergers came out. And I've been on your show and off and on for almost 20 years. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to actually have such an important platform to be able to reach people and explain to them things that otherwise they're not going to be able to see through the mainstream media. Well, it's a very interesting question. When you and I talked, I should say, your producer and I discussed, today's interview, and the idea was to look at some of the exit plans, as you call it, for the elite. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that we've seen a lot of people being killed, or there's been attempts on their lives, and obviously the last two cases, we can talk about the Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, we can talk about the death of Raisi, and the assassination attempt on Robert Fico is naturally associated with his position on Ukraine. They say that Fico was shot by a 71-year-old retiree who bears little resemblance to a lone gunman. Now, if you look at things conceptually, in other words, from a much higher vantage point, so if the assassination attempt is political, then either it's a signal to the entire Eurosceptic community before the upcoming European elections, where the fate of individuals such as Ursula von der Leyen is decided, and also hundreds of billions of US dollars are at stake, Alex, or for Fico himself. Now, Slovakia is not in a position to exert global influence. It's a pipsqueak country. And so assassination has always been, well, let's say, an extremely comfortable argument. And needless to say, it would have been easier to remove the unwanted Fico in a kind of a Maidan or color revolution. And so the motive for the assassination attempt must be extremely convincing and very, very urgent, Alex. And needless to say, it hasn't come to light, but it will. And so if the West, the collective West, with its rules-based order, okay, going back to the end of World War II, so this collective West now prefers to kill political undesirables without wasting time on the Maidans, on buying them off, on scaring them off, on showing them the files or the photographs their pedophilic events, then life on the planet will soon become very, very interesting, Alex. And so, to put it in context, the collective FICO is not a victim of the struggle between the West and Russia, as many think. FICO is a victim of the internal struggle between political forces in Europe, more specifically between the two, let's say, main coalitions, the coalition or the collection represented by Fico himself and Viktor Orban of Hungary, which focuses on ordinary democracy. In other words, on the fact that governments must express the interests of the citizens, the preservation of national European cultural identity as well, which is very important, religion and also Christianity. And the second coalition, the other side, which is the postmodern globalist coalition, and let's call it liberal coalition, although this will not be accurate. This coalition proclaims itself to be liberal, but its fundamental values contradict classical liberalism. And so we can call it ultra-liberal, but this word has not yet become, let's say, a generally recognized term, and there's still no precise definition of the new ideology that was born from classical liberalism.
I mean, isn't it really just transhumanism? Haven't they just turned into their final form, transhumanism?
Well, eventually transhumanism, posthumanism. The final form is going to be posthumanism. But the guy who shot Fico is not a Ukrainian Nazi, but a liberal gone crazy, a Soros clone. And so the conscience of these people, I'm talking about Fico, I'm also talking about the people, who want to kill Donald Trump in the United States, who want to kill Putin, who want to kill other leaders, is under terrible radiation of this incessant propaganda. And they begin to spew this hatred. And we've seen this in the United States, the Trump syndrome towards anyone who has the opposite political views. So a liberal who is against the freedom of others to have a different opinion is a direct contradiction to the idea of liberalism. This is something that Tucker Carlson was talking about a few weeks ago. But these people are no longer able to understand this, because they're really on the verge of madness. And again, we've seen this in the United States with all these people, screaming at the top of the lungs when Trump was elected back in 2016. And so the entire world propaganda of this world authorities is raiding such crazy people. And so the sign of this madness is a symptom of mental illness. And we have already millions of these people the world over. So the idea, again, to go back to the initial question, the idea, again, that the rules-based order is on its deathbed, okay, which means that a new order needs to be created, and a lot of people are going to be killed. And the liberals understand, in other words, the liberal banking financiers, the financiers in the United States, if we focus on the United States, they understand that if they lose the elections, they're going to be killed, they're going to be imprisoned. And which is why it's all bets are off. It's a free-for-all. They have no choice but to win, because if they lose, they're gone, like physically gone.
I want to elaborate on that key point that you're saying that there's a clash of civilizations. There's an article out called The Revenge of the Normies that, kind of quantifies that in a populist way. It's not too sophisticated, but it gets the basics. The globalists have their post-human world, their scientific takeover plan to secure their power, give themselves life extension. But that all rested on destroying the old order and the public not knowing that the globalists were the ones destroying us. But now, because they've been exposed, and Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab and King Charles and others are so hated, they understand now that they're going to get the blame for what they've engineered, and their bunkers aren't going to protect them. So that old order is rolling forward with all its funding and BlackRock and central bank power, but it's running into more opposition every moment. So the question is, what, with the rules-based, New World Order dying, what will be its replacement, and what will be the power struggle over its collapse? And that's going to be a very, very dangerous period of time. Speak to that and tell us what you think is going to probably come out of that, or what the different scenarios could be. Daniel Estulin.